Scott, let's start. We're going to talk about Bakhmut. What do we need to know?
Well, I mean, it's it's continuing. I mean, Bakhmut, the struggle for that region, the Bakhmut Soledar juncture, so to speak, has been ongoing since May. Um, it's been a meat grinder the entire time. Prigozhin, the head of Wagner private military company, has, and he's not prone. I mean, he trolls just like everybody else. There's no doubt about that. He's become a master of trolling, but he's been pretty honest about the nature of the fighting. And when he says that he's tagged and bagged 110,000 Ukrainian soldiers, just his unit alone, I believe him. And that's indicative of what Bakhmut has become. It has become literally the graveyard of the Ukrainian army. They, for whatever reason, whether, if there's some grand military, plan that the Ukrainians have that says we have to hold on to Bakhmut no matter what, or if this has just become a political battle where, similar to Stalingrad, the Ukrainians just can't let go and they keep pouring resources and resources and resources into a losing fight. It doesn't matter. The battle's about to end. The Russians are closing in on the heights to the south and west of the city. They're driving down from the north, and it appears that in the coming days, if not even sooner, that they will not only have an encirclement by fire, meaning that the last road that brings supplies in and as an avenue of retreat out of Bakhmut, you can't travel it without being fired on by the Russians. They may physically, link up and surround whatever troops are left in Bakhmut, and that number could be quite large. We won't know until until they count the bodies, whether the prisoners or the people who opted to fight to the death. But either way, this is the graveyard of the Ukrainian military, and it's the beginning of the end of the demilitarization campaign that Russia is undertaking. That campaign is designed to destroy the Ukrainian military, and that's what's happening. And once the Russians finish in Bakhmut, they will continue. They will continue to press forward. There's indications that there's other areas that they'll exploit besides this, or they'll drive on to Kramatorsk, which is the next major city, and take that, because they won't stop until they have freed all of Donbass and Novorossiya, all that territory that the Ukrainians currently occupy. They will be evicted from, and further, the Russians have said they're going to push 150 kilometers past that to create a buffer of space to prevent the Ukrainians from being able to bombard Russian territory. And that's what we're seeing. The Russians are going to continue to do this, and in the process, they'll continue to kill Ukrainian soldiers in large numbers. And eventually, Ukraine's going to run out of troops or run out of artillery shells. We know they're going to run out of artillery shells sometime this summer, because Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO, in a surprisingly honest moment, said, "We don't have any more to give you. It's all over." The question is, will the Ukrainian military collapse before that point or after that point? But what's not a question is that the Ukrainian military is going to collapse.
Let me ask you a question, and I think this is we talk about the encirclement of Bakhmut, here's what I thought to myself: what then? And what I mean is this: okay, General Ritter, your subordinates come to you, boom, they say, "Sir, it's encircled. We have physically encircled. It's not fire control. We have troops on all sides. They're encircled. What are our instructions?" Because at that point, you can sit and just continue to fire on them and make them run out of ammunition. You can close in on them. You can wait them out because they run out of, you have another options. So based on Scott Ritter, what would you do? And add this: we know in history that this is a centuries-old tactic of the Russians, which is to create a cauldron. Now, traditionally, it's create a cauldron, turn up the heat in the cauldron until you can't take the heat anymore, and cook you alive, basically, until you give up. But based on history, based on you, what do you do? What would you do if you, when your subordinate gave you the salute and said, "Sir, they are the town of Bakhmut is encircled. What shall we do now, if anything?"
Kill them all. I mean, you can't leave these Ukrainian forces in significant numbers in your rear area because one, then you have to contain them, meaning that you have to put troops to man that perimeter, while you also have to man a line facing the rest of the Ukrainian army. And in the case of Mariupol, when that was invested and surrounded, the land bridge created a significant physical space between the front line and Mariupol that made it virtually impossible for the Ukrainians to try a break through or a breakout. Once you achieve this encirclement, you're talking about a very narrow band. So you actually create a moment of vulnerability for you, right? Because you have troops now that they're not facing one direction. You have to have somebody facing this way and somebody facing that way, and the band is narrow. So there's a moment of vulnerability. And especially early on, because the troops inside Bakhmut will still have a modicum of unit cohesion. They will have, a certain amount of ammunition and sustainability. The longer an encirclement goes, as they eat up their ammunition, eat up their food, eat up their resources, as they take casualties, this unit cohesion will break down, and their effectiveness as a fighting force will diminish. But early on, it's the Russians who now have become vulnerable, and so I don't think you can keep your foot off the gas. At least this is what I would say. Right. Is whatever we've been doing, keep doing it. Yesterday, you told me you killed 1,000 of them. Today, I want 1,000 more dead. Tomorrow, I want 1,000 more dead. I want them all dead or surrendered. We don't pause. There is no pause, no operational pause here. Go, 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 go. Finish the job, because the sooner we can clear out this cauldron, we now free up significant forces that can be moved to the front and continue the pushing. As long as you have that cauldron, and again, it depends how many Ukrainian soldiers are caught up in. Is it 500? Is it 5,000? Is it 25,000? We don't know. But that's an important factor. There's a lot of fighting left even after they encircle it, unless the Ukrainians just up and surrender. But as we saw with Azovstal and Mariupol, you had certain Ukrainian units that surrendered early on, and then you had others that fought it out to the bitter end. And I would imagine, given the fact that the Ukrainians have deployed some of their more elite units into Bakhmut, that these boys aren't in the surrender business. They're in the fight to the death business. And unfortunately, they're going to be given that opportunity. But like I said, this creates a moment of vulnerability for the Russians, that if you hesitate, if you pause, the Ukrainians can take advantage of that and launch counterattacks that then can break up your momentum. So my advice would just be pedal to the metal, keep killing them as long as they present themselves. Don't stop, don't stop, don't stop, don't stop.
Yeah, I just thought about that. It makes sense because they're surrounded, but at least on 3 of the sides, they're surrounded by a very thick group of a deep Russian military contingent. On that last area, it's very thin. So if you are inside that cauldron, as whatever we want to call it, you have 2 options: A, surrender, or B, well, 3. You can sit there, which means you're going to die, because they're going to pound. They can just pound you with artillery day and night until there's nobody left to move. You can sit there and wait to die. That ain't much of an option. So really, you either put up the white flag and surrender and become a POW, or if you got 20,000 people, that skinny band, you target all 20,000 on the skinniest area that you have, that last area that they closed, and try to punch through that and get out of it as many as you can. So if you're the Russians, that's where they're going to hit. I mean, that's your only option, right? The skinniest area, just target that and try to punch through and get out as many people as you can, or put up a white flag. I don't see any other options. Do you, if you're inside that cauldron?
I mean, another option is basically to tell them to sit tight and just become an ammunition sump. I mean, the fact of the matter is the Russians can't ignore this force. And so you said, yeah, they're going to pound them and pound them artillery. Well, every round that lands in Bakhmut is a round that's not landing in the rest of the battlefield. And so, a very cynical approach would be, hey, boys, you're dying anyways. What we need you to do is hold on as long as possible to absorb as many Russian resources as possible, both in terms of manpower that has to invest the cauldron, but also the artillery, the air that's going to have to come in to eliminate you. And you're buying us time now for us to regroup and dig in and create a new defensive belt to redistribute our forces, etc. So thank you. You're all heroes of Ukraine. We're gonna we're gonna fire artillery shells instead of leaflets. They're gonna have medals. You each can put the medal on, and whatever you want to do. But that's another option, and it depends on the quality of the troops. That's I have to say that if I were in that situation, that'd be the mission I'd want. I'd want basically to hold out as long as possible to force the Russians to commit as many resources as possible to eliminate me, thereby buying time for my comrades who are still militarily viable to dig in, rest, recover, recuperate, reorganize, whatever needs to be done to make up for the fact that we just lost Bakhmut. Again, I don't know. I mean, this isn't a good situation for the Ukrainians. It's there's no good side on this. This is a defeat, no matter how you do it. This isn't von Manstein deliberately creating a cauldron to suck in resources because he has a master plan to do X, Y, and Z. This is the Ukrainians overcommitting to a specific geographic feature and now paying the price because their gambit has failed. It looks like the Russians are on the cusp of encircling and eliminating, Bakhmut. There's a lot of fighting left. It's not going to be easy, but I think the handwriting's on the wall.
I also think that, the discussion of, again, I don't take anything at face value. The NATO, et cetera, are saying we're running out of ammunition. I don't know if we can make it into the winter or the fall. For all I know, that could be propaganda too. It could very well be true, but we take everything at face value. I tend to think, looking at history, my position all along has been this: if I were the Russians, I wouldn't be in a rush. Time's on my side. I wouldn't be in a rush to do a big arrow offensive. I wouldn't be in a rush to do anything. I'd be in a rush to let this thing to continue to chip away at the foundation and allow this house of cards to collapse politically and militarily on its own. And the longer this thing goes on, the more, to me, it gets obvious that they are not in a rush. So what's up with that? Do you think there's going to be a big arrow offensive? Are you starting to say maybe there won't? Maybe they will just chip away? I don't know. Your thoughts on that, Scott?
I believe that there's a big arrow offensive taking place right now, but it's a really big arrow, meaning it's an arrow that takes the whole front. Is just being pressed by the Russians. You're not getting the dramatic advances that one would expect if they concentrated forces inside a specific penetration. What they're doing right now is shaping the battlefield. One of the reasons why the Ukrainians are having such a difficult time in Bakhmut is that they cannot divert sufficient forces to reverse this outcome. They are pouring everything available into Bakhmut, but because the Russians are advancing or putting pressure in the Zaporizhia front, Uladar front, up near Krasny Limon, in that area, even further north, because there's this constant pressure being placed, the Ukrainians have to keep forces on the front line, and on occasion, when the Russians do get that 5 to 7 kilometer breakthrough, divert reinforcements to try and plug that hole. So I think the offensive has already begun because it's in the preparatory phase where you're shaping the battlefield, defining enemy capabilities. You're dictating outcomes to the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are compelled to react to what you're doing, not you react to what they're doing. And in that reaction mode, they're burning through resources at a quicker rate than you are because everything you're doing is pre-planned. As it's easier to there's less friction when you plan something and you execute what you're trying to do. There's more friction when you have to receive and then adjust. And so that's what the Ukrainians are doing. They're creating a lot of friction. It's burning through resources at a quicker rate, and this is the Russian goal. I agree that I think what they're doing on the battlefield is not calendar driven; it's results driven. We keep hearing about some of these formations that have been mobilized they're still in the training ground, putting the finishing touches on very specific kinds of training. We're talking about combined arms training for a rapid advance against a contested zone. Very specific kind of training, breakthrough training. And why? Why would you go through that unless that's the battle that you're envisioning coming up? But do you come in and just randomly say, okay, hey, go to Sector C, charge? No, you shape the battlefield. So while you're preparing this, you're shaping the battlefield so that when the unit becomes available, you have an idea where you want them to go and what you want them to accomplish. And so you can transition to that, because you don't want to take a unit. For instance, in the U.S. Army, when they would train units up to go into Afghanistan and Iraq, they would take them to the National Training Center in Fort Irwin and run them through their paces. And the idea was to get them to be trained to a certain level of proficiency, the best you could get, and then rapidly take this really premier unit and get it plugged in on the battlefield. The last thing you'd want to do is take them to National Training Center, train, and then say, all right, back to garrison, we're going to wait 3-4 months. All that training's out the window. So you got all these units right now that are going through their training. I have a feeling that some of these units have had their training extended because the Russians are saying, no, another week, keep them going. I don't want these boys sitting around doing nothing. I want them focused, sharp. And then the battlefield is being developed, and at the appropriate time, these units will make the transition. And we already see units beginning to transition in. We see these camps that were, if you remember, before the invasion, they had all these Russian camps that were formed up around the border area of the United States going, what are you doing moving your troops inside Russia? And the Russians was like, well, we're moving troops inside Russia. Ain't none of your business. But these camps are being built up now or rebuilt, and forces are moving in. These are the forces that are coming from the training area. And I just don't imagine they're going to sit there forever. Look at what's happening in Belarus. They've extended the exercises until March 3rd. Why? Because you don't want troops returned to garrison.
Right.
You want the troops to be ready to go in a fighting mood. So that's what I think is happening right now, is they're shaping the battlefield. They're identifying weaknesses, or they're creating opportunities. And when the time comes, they will plug in these trained, equipped, prepared forces to do a very specific mission. And I believe that mission will be to achieve significant breakthroughs of the Ukrainian defensive lines that are prone for exploitation by follow-on forces, which is the kind of training that's taking place right now in the training grounds in the various military districts that are adjacent to the special military operation area of operations.
Yeah, and it sounds like to me, like you're saying, this thing can be very nuanced in that they could say, okay, when we take Bakhmut, we're going to then hit here, do this, and attack this. If we get this over here first, we'll go this. When we get there, but if this happens first, so it can be a kind of an elaborate thing that we have all these reserves, and depending upon what we achieve at a given time, we can make very specific move. You know what I mean? A series of contingency plans, a fluid plan, rather than like what everybody thinks of the sledgehammer. On date X. D-Day, you know what I mean? Date X, we bring all of our troops forward, and it's somebody blows, somebody blows a trumpet, and some guy gets on the front of the horse and puts a sword up in the air, and everybody, the cavalry charges. That it could be much more nuanced. Bakhmut could be, once we take Bakhmut and we take this, we got some high ground we want to take, then we're going to hit them real hard here. Or, you know what I mean? I mean, does that sound like what it could be?
Well, it does. I will say one thing, though. You have to be driven by battlefield realities, and there's two battlefield realities that the Russians must address. One is logistics. If you're going to carry out, large-scale offensive operations, that's a very logistically intensive thing. And the front is, it doesn't make logistics easy. So there's a lot of pre-planning that has to take place. I think one of the reasons why we're seeing, or at least reading about in Telegram and elsewhere, about the reduction of artillery ammunition allotments being made to front lines is because I believe the Russians are building up stocks of ammunition for these offensives, and they may have to duplicate, because in order to give yourself options, it's not like, okay, here's my unit, and if I'm going to plug them in here, we'll just bring the logistics train here and do that. It doesn't work that way because of rail line problems, of road problems, etc. And so there's a lot of preparatory work that has to be done that might be, and I'm speculating here, but might be have some duplication, meaning that I can take a unit and I can plug it in, but I can't take the logistics and plug it in. That I'm going to have to build repetitive logistics sustainability in several sectors to give me the options of, do I want to go to A, B, or C? And so this takes time to prepare. Because of HIMARS and other things, you have to be creative. You can't put all your ammo in one dump. You have to split the dumps up. You have to have transport now, because now you've increased transport requirements. So you have to have transports allocated, and you have to have fuel allocated for that. So there's a huge logistics problem that has to be solved. Fortunately for the Russians, they have some of the greatest military staffs out there who are very good at this sort of thing. But to take theory and make it reality requires resources, and this is another thing that takes time. So you've got to not only train these units, but you have to get the logistical resources necessary to sustain combat operations, forward deployed and prepared for operations. And again, because you can't just plug logistics in and out, they probably are replicating at least 2 or 3 times, giving each unit at least 2 or 3 options, axes of advance that will be developed. And so this takes time, it takes resources, it takes planning, because the last thing you need is to defeat yourself. And the best way to defeat yourself is to go into battle, begin a fight, get an exploitation, start your breakout, run out of gas, or begin your breakout, run out of ammunition, and now the enemy counterattacks. Boy, you're going to look pretty stupid at that point in time. You have to plan for all these contingencies. You have to plan for the fact that the battle isn't going to unfold the way you wanted. So even though you plan for a certain norm of artillery expenditure, you better have a plan for artillery expenditure plus 50% that doesn't impede on your follow-on capability. So you're going to have to over-prepare so that if you have to grind out more to get that breakthrough, you're not eating the resources you need to achieve that breakthrough. This is where good staff work comes in. And I trust the Russian staff planning process, and I think they're probably working in this direction. But that takes time. So that's one calendar problem. Now the other calendar problem running in, because I just gave you a calendar problem that extends, the timeline for beginning this kind of operation, decisive operation, the level of preparation that's necessary. They're running up against another calendar which is coming towards them, and that is what's happening on the other side of the deal. Right now, we all chuckle, chortle, tanks ain't getting enough tanks, ain't getting enough this. They're not getting F-16s. There's not going to be 155 millimeter ammunition available in July and August. Ha, 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 ha. Yeah, but it's going to be available maybe in November, December, January, February. Because just because the NATO can't get it to them now or this summer doesn't mean NATO's not going to eventually get it to them. And if this conflict continues, Russia now runs into the problem that NATO is going to catch up with reality. If the Ukrainian army can hold on and provide viable resistance, until which time NATO can start pumping in hundreds of tanks. Maybe NATO decides we're going to provide modern aircraft. Maybe they finally solve the ammunition problem. Now you've complicated the military picture. Russia has a increasingly reducing window of opportunity that I continue to believe reaches its most open point sometime between August and October. I think those are the three critical months: August, September, October, that Russia has to be focused on achieving all of the major objectives by that time. Because if the Ukrainians hold on past that, Russia runs into a couple issues. One, sustainability issues on their part. 700,000 troops, if that's what they have, let's say it's between 700,000 troops, eat up a lot of resources. And when you get them engaged in concerted offensive operations, you're eating up resources, which invariably requires an operational pause. That's just the way war works, buddy. We broke out of Normandy. We drove across France. But you know how we set up the Battle of the Bulge? We ran out of resources. So we had to actually stop and get everything to catch up. The Red Ball Express, people have heard about that. Getting those trucks, going down, bringing the stuff out of Calais port, out of the other ports, bringing them up to resupply the forces. And you created a window of opportunity for the Germans to launch a counterattack. Germans using reinforcements that the West wasn't aware that they had assembled. So now if Russia starts this attack and they can't close the deal by, say, October, they will have to invariably have an operational pause. And when that happens, if that coincides at a time when NATO has provided significant reinforcements to the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians were wise enough to hold troops back to create viable maneuver forces, now you've created an opportunity, not for Ukraine to win the war, but Ukraine wins by not losing. That's the critical thing here. So I do think there's some calendar pressures on the Russians. It's the requirement of preparation, which extends the calendar going forward, and there's the issue of NATO's ability to reinforce, which drives the calendar in this direction. And I think there's a 3-month window of opportunity, August, September, October, that where Russia has the prime opportunity to accomplish its military task of demilitarization, the destruction of the Ukrainian military. Because if you don't destroy the Ukrainian military by then, you're going to have a different problem set come winter of 2023, 2024. And then you're going to have to do this all over again. And that's when it gets exhausting for a nation.
Yeah, it's war's a chess game, it's in there playing. You got to take advantage. Well, we're going to jump over to Rockfin, everyone. As I said, I'll fill you in real quick. Rockfin is a free speech platform that I have a show that I also broadcast on. Everybody, please become a member of my Rockfin channel. It costs nothing. There's no advertisements on Rockfin. That's no censorship. It's free speech channel. That's why I like and support Rockfin. So please, you can watch everything on there. Please, you'll watch all of my stuff. But you would ask, well, then how do they stay on the air? How does Rockfin stay in business if it's a free speech platform and they don't charge anything? What they do is you can become a subscriber. Subscribers keep them on. And all of the content creators on Rockfin do one show per week, at least one show that is for subscribers only. And this is mine. And subscribers like $14.99 a month, or if you join for a year, they knock a couple months off and it becomes cheaper than $14.99 a month. If you can afford it, I appreciate you becoming a subscriber and helping keep this free speech platform on the air. If you can't, just become a member of my Rockfin channel. Doesn't cost anything. You'll see everything but my weekly subscribers only show, and I showed half of that today. This is it. So because I want everybody, a lot of people are on, I want everybody to get a pretty good idea of what we're trying to accomplish here and get to hang out with Scott. At any rate, so I'm jumping over to Rockfin. Please, if you can, become a subscriber. If you can't, just keep your money for yourself and your family. I know times are difficult. Thank you very much, and we're jumping over to Rockfin for our exclusive show. The other 30 minutes of it.